What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode on the Landscaping Podcast. I am here with Shay Brickhouse, owner of Landscaping Unlimited, and we are your co-hosts on the Landscaping Podcast, here to talk to you about all things landscaping, hardscaping, and life. We've had some awesome episodes. We've run the gamut. We've spoken about parade floats recently. We've spoken about parenting and things of that nature. But today, you know what we're talking about? We're going back to landscaping, and we're going to talk some more landscaping. So Shay, what we're talking about today is the top 3 mistakes people make with their landscaping. You have your list of the top 3, and I would love to pick your brain. I've seen a few things, but man, the things that you have seen and had to fix, I'm looking forward to hearing this. And maybe those listening will be able to avoid these mistakes in the future, or start to assess their lawn now and kind of see how things are working to make sure that they can fix it and do a little preventative maintenance before they have to do some major corrective maintenance.
Yep.
So top 3 mistakes people make with their landscape.
All right, number 1, we have to talk about water. We talked about this in previous podcasts, like dabbled in it. In some of our videos, we always talk about water. And so that is why it's number 1 on this list of mistakes in your landscape. People do not think about water. They think about aesthetics, they think about how they want their property to look, and they totally neglect where is the water going. They start thinking about paved surfaces, brick patios, concrete patios, lean-tos, and pergolas, and they don't think about the water. Water has to go somewhere. When we show up to a job site, it's usually the first thing we look at is where the water's going, where is it coming from, and where can we put the water so that it doesn't hurt the lawn. And so water really turns into a lot of things. One, high traffic areas, you end up with a mud puddle. If you're running it all off your driveway into your parking areas, you've got a kid that's going into college, but they still have their vehicle here and they're parking off the side of the driveway. That area becomes muddy because all the water that you were running from your gutters to your driveway now is to that area. So you end up with wet area there and killing the lawn. You start promoting fungus issues. You start increasing your runoff. If you fertilize your lawn a lot and you're running all the water, onto the street, well, you've got runoff issues from that. So water really is just a huge factor in everything that we do. Basements, crawl spaces, all that stuff around your house. If you don't think about it, you'll run that water back into your home, and then you've got mold and mildew issues, rotten wood, fascias, and all that good stuff. And you don't want to do all that. So water is one of the biggest things.
Do you think that people think that it's because they can't handle it? Like they can trim their bush, they can mow their lawn, but they just accept water as like an inevitability, so they just accept it. They don't even think like, oh, this is probably something a landscaper can handle.
Well, I think a lot of it, they don't think about it. I think that, the weekend warriors or the DIYers, they jump out there on the weekend, they've been to Lowe's, they've been to Home Depot, wherever their home and garden show place is, and they've picked out all the plants they want in the flower bed that they want to attack that weekend, and they haven't thought about the fact that they're going to build this bed up and now it's going to hold this water back. They haven't thought about that. So it's not that they can't handle it. It wasn't something that was thought about beforehand, so they did something, and then now they've created a problem because they didn't think about it to begin with.
I think that's one of the elements that I hope if you're listening, you understand. These are things that are preventable. They're avoidable, and they're things, like I said, before you have to have, that $10,000 fix. I was speaking about the premium landscaping versus, just mow and blow. And one of the things I had mentioned was, that could be a $10,000 fix plus easily if you let it get out of hand, where it could be maybe $2,500 to divert all that water away from the home. You saved yourself, you're just pushing things away. And that's what Landscaping Unlimited does, obviously. But it's something that nobody will fix if you don't ever address it. And you don't have to sit there and look at your lawn and just see that giant puddle. Looks like you have a pool.
Yep.
Like, man, just go buy a pool at that point. Which we can do too. But also, looking at the sitting water and the fungus issue. Can you talk more about that? Because I didn't appreciate funguses in properties until I was working here. Yeah. So I don't think enough people know about it.
Yeah, so you've got, depending on what type of grass you've got, you have different funguses that attack different grasses, and some are hardier than others, or they tolerate those funguses, a lot more, and they don't show signs of stress. However, I'll talk about 2 grasses right now that I can think of the most that have the most issue. One, centipede. So we have large patch and centipede down here in our area. So warm season grass, fungus that attacks warm seasons, not to be mistaken for brown patch, which would be targeting your cool season grasses. But large patch, the soil temps, air temps, wet, moist ground, all that stuff kind of plays effect into that fungus acting up. Centipede, that grass is affected the most from large patch, and so therefore, if you can control water beforehand, then you can eliminate the amount of water you sit on that lawn. So in the springtime, when the soil temps are right around that 50, 55 degrees, and we're starting to get like kind of cool nights, but the yard's still staying wet throughout the day, throughout the evening, that fungus is starting to become active. Whereas if you can get that lawn dry, then you won't have that fungus problem. And so therefore your grass will be a lot healthier. When you fertilize your lawn, you'll actually help the grass instead of help the fungus, because the fertilizer, believe it or not, actually ends up helping that fungus grow and gives it what it needs, and gives the grass that you've got next to the fungus all the nutrients it needs to live, which then is everything the fungus thrives off of.
Yep,
so it's not that, don't mistake in that the fertilizer is feeding the fungus. That's not how it works. The fertilizer is feeding the grass that's healthy next to that line where the fungus is creeping over, and giving the fungus what it wants, which is healthy centipede to destroy. So don't mistake in that fertilizer's feeding the fungus.
Yep. I'm thinking about it like a towel. Like if you have a wet towel and you ball it up and you just throw it somewhere and it sits there, like you're gonna have like a moldy towel.
Yeah.
People need to look at their lawn like that, especially if it's constantly wet. It's just sitting water on the property, and there's a bunch of large trees, so it's always shaded. That's a wet towel in a dark closet.
Yep.
It's just gonna become moldy over time. And so I'm thinking about the guys who take great pride in their lawn. They're going out there and they're beating their head against the wall because they think they're doing everything right, and they're like, why can't I get this grass to work here? Well, you've got something wrong in the soil, and once it's in the soil, correct me if I'm wrong, you're not gonna be able to get it out until you remove all the soil that's impacted by that fungus.
Yeah.
And so this is why water it's not just, the flooded basement or like the runoff, it's also things like this that are really destroying what could be otherwise beautiful lawns.
Yeah, there's still some studies out there as far as, how much can you excavate to fully get rid of the fungus, and then it also comes into what's feasible, as far as economically speaking, financially speaking, what is actually doable and makes sense. Whether you just turn that patch of grass into a flower bed, or you convert your lawn to a different type of grass, which isn't susceptible to the disease as much as centipede is. So sometimes that's a solution, and we've done that in the past and it's worked great. However, sometimes it's just best to abandon that as lawn and turn it into a flower bed or ornamental garden. So that's certainly a case too. So we want to, just to revert back, we talked about large patch and centipede. We also have like gray leaf spot in St. Augustine, and so we see that a lot. And same thing.
Can you describe that? Like, what is gray leaf spot?
So gray leaf spot is it's a fungus as well. We see it a lot in St. Augustine lawns, so that's how I will gear this towards that. We've got a lawn we're actually working at right now. Beautiful St. Augustine lawn. However, they've got fungus in it, gray leaf spot, and it is a gray leaf spot on the blade of the grass.
Properly named.
Yep, properly named, and that's how it's got its name. But it's really, realistically, the same symptoms you've had from large patch is kind of the same symptoms you have from gray leaf spot, except for it doesn't kill the entire blade of grass at one time. You go out there and you can find all these little specks and spots on it. Over some time, it will kill that whole area, but it gives a little different sign, like as far as looking at it. The patterns are different than large patch, but it's all from the same results. Too much water, not enough airflow, sometimes too much nitrogen out can amplify how fast that gray leaf spot covers across your lawn on St. Augustine. So,
well, I think that part right there is important too, is you're talking about the nitrogen, and people are trying to add to they're thinking the lawn needs more nutrients, but what they're actually doing is just speeding up or accelerating the process and the damage being done to the grass. And so again, that's why I wanted to have this episode, is if we're talking about the top 3 mistakes that people are making, and you start out with water, like I certainly hope people are listening, like you start with the water. Make sure your water is good before anything else we talk about in this episode. Look at all that we just mentioned just with water. And so it's an important aspect to all landscapes and hardscapes to a degree, but obviously we're talking more about plants here. So number 2, what's the second biggest mistake people are making when it comes to their landscape and the property of their home?
So what I would say the second biggest mistake would be plant selection in your design. And nothing's wrong with going out and picking a pretty plant and putting it in your lawn. However, a lot of times, and more often than not, we see these beautiful plants that are planted in the wrong place. So you've got an area between your sidewalk and your house that is only 4 feet and we've got people planting recurved ligustrums in front of their house, which grow to a maturity size of like 7 to 10 feet, depending on if you really let them go, in width. But you planted them in a 4 foot wide area, and so it's a beautiful plant and it has its place, but not where you planted it. So knowing a little bit about the plant, planting it in the right spot, is really crucial to getting your landscape the way it, to look the way you want it to look. Another common example is, river birches. Sorry, my landscape brain wanted to start throwing out botanical names. And
listen, we can't do the science Latin roots, like simple names for the people. What are they going to see at Lowe's, or the nursery?
But a river birch, we commonly go to a little bit older landscapes. Here recently, I don't see them as often. However, in some older landscapes, we would see these beautiful river birch trees. More often than not, are planted too close to a house, particularly in older landscapes than what we see in a lot of newer landscapes. I'm glad to see that trend going away. But a lot of times we would show up to a house, to rehabilitate their landscape from a previous owner to a new owner, and we're looking at river birch trees that are planted 15 feet from the house. Beautiful. It casted great canopy over the house. It also casted all the roots into the crawl space, and the brick underpinning of the house would all be cracked, mortar joints breaking, planted right next to the drain fields of the septic tanks. And so now we've got roots, going all into the drain field. They've got French drains running from the gutters and all this stuff. Well, guess what? They don't work anymore because the river birch roots are all in the drain pipes. And so, you've got a tree that's planted in the wrong place. It's a beautiful tree, but had it been moved another 15 feet, in a different direction or away from all these utilities, then you wouldn't have had an issue that you're now having to fix. So it's, right plant, wrong place.
I'm thinking about the people that are looking to spruce up aesthetically their homes, and so that's why they're getting these plants. They want it to look better. They like the flower. They like the shade it's going to offer. There's something about it, obviously, it's calling to them, and that is something we offer. Whenever we do design, I know that I've heard you speak to homeowners about why you would plant certain plants in certain areas. I'm trying to think of the nursery, because a lot of people listening might be going to the nursery. And there is one that you mentioned whose owner was he understands all this as well, and he happily discusses it with people. And so for anybody listening, one, you should speak to the nursery owner and the people of these plants to tell them what you're looking to do so they can give you guidance. But I wanted to give a shout out to that nursery. I can't think of the name of it.
Yeah, so that nursery that you're referring to, we deal with a bunch of nurseries, but the nurseries you're referring to is actually Plant and See in Greenville, North Carolina. Phenomenal nursery. It's very unique. You've walked around there.
Beautiful. I took photos there. It was beautiful.
It's a great place to go and just look at plants, look at landscaping art, and engage in conversation with the staff there, because they're very knowledgeable. So
that was going to be my question. Is it appropriate for a homeowner to go and speak to the staff about their questions about, hey, I'm looking to plant this here? That's not an issue?
No,
I've never done it.
I mean, Plant and See, that nursery is more geared towards the homeowners than it is the commercial contractors.
So as a commercial landscaper, you're going to Plant and See?
Yeah, I go to Plant and See as a commercial landscaper, mainly because I'm looking for a unique plant. So when we're at Plant and See, we're looking at plants that are unique. They're a little bit one of. They might not be stocked regularly at one of these larger wholesale nurseries that we shop at. So when I go there, I'm looking for uniqueness. I'm looking for the size of the plant that may have grown more mature than what you would have got at a more traditional wholesale nursery. And so when I go there, I get to get all that. And then I also get to interact with the staff there. They're very knowledgeable about their plants, and a lot of times I'll end up spending more time there than what I intended on, because I'm engaging in conversation with them, and we're talking about plants, and we're exchanging which plants we like. I'm hearing which plants he likes, and all that good stuff there. So it's a good time whenever we're there.
That's good. So we've discussed water, we've discussed plant location and design.
Yep.
And so what's the third biggest mistake that homeowners are making?
So another mistake that we see often is planting or designing. The homeowners aren't designing for how they're going to use the property. They're designing strictly on aesthetics. And so they've got this nice, beautiful lawn, or they've got this fancy, beautiful flower bed. However, they haven't thought about how they're actually going to use the space. And what I mean by that is, if your goal is to entertain your family and entertain your friends and have, Christmas parties and Thanksgiving gatherings and family events and birthday parties and stuff there, then you've got to design around that. You can't expect everyone to come over and hang out in the backyard, but you've got nowhere for them to sit.
Yep.
You know, you've got no shelter, or you've got a huge event planned, but and it's going to rain. You've got nowhere for them to stand. Then that event is now useless. And so you've got to design your landscape around how you intend to use it. Another example of this would be, your driveway space. You can have the most elaborate lawn and landscape, but if you don't have anywhere to park your cars, you don't have a drive-in garage, or you don't have a detached garage, you need somewhere to park. Well, if you've got two high school students and they've got their driver's license, you and your spouse have a car, each have a car. I mean, that's potential of 4 vehicles, but you only have a space to park 2. Mm-hmm. Well, they're parking on your lawn. So you want to plan on somewhere for them to park and design around that, rather than, well, what's the prettiest tree I can get? Yeah. Because ultimately they're going to destroy your lawn driving all over it.
I want to bring up a real world example, which was a gentleman has a pool being installed in his backyard, and you had asked the age of his kids and if they hosted parties.
Yeah.
Could you explain that, and how from that moment he was like, oh, I didn't even think about that, and then you sort of laid out the layout as to how we're going to go about it and the design. And actually I look forward to showcasing that property once you do get in motion.
Yeah. So another shout out to one of my horticulture instructors, Miss Amy Thomas. We've had a ton of conversations in the classroom, but I don't feel like they were all class related. But we talk about design a lot, and it was always, one, figure out where the kitchen is, the living room is, and what windows people are going to be looking at the area that you're landscaping. So you can create aesthetically a landscape that they appreciate from inside as well as from outside.
I never thought about that.
And then you also,
awesome.
Yep. Like think about it, if you're
it makes perfect sense.
If you're washing dishes and you've got a window in front of your sink, some houses are set up that way. So if you're sitting in front of your sink and you're tired of washing dishes, if you plant a plant right outside that window, like a large camellia, a Yuletide camellia, or a Kanjiro camellia that comes up and you can see those flowers, yeah, you're doing the doom and gloom of washing dishes, but now you see this beautiful flower that's right outside your window. So you want to plan on stuff like that so you can get the multi-perspective of how this landscape's designed. But to get back into the conversation with this gentleman and his pool, I'm asking, does he have kids and what age they are, so that I can figure out right now how he's going to use the property. And what that means to me is, if I know that he's got a newborn, then I'm thinking safety. I'm thinking I don't want any rose bushes, like knockout rose bushes or anything like that with thorns, right around the perimeter of the sidewalks, because that's where that kid's going to end up. Mm-hmm. And I don't want them to get hurt. So yucca plants, things that are real pointy, I don't want those right there at those intersecting points, so that the kids aren't getting hurt. Now, if they're older, we can start to go into a little bit more of that stuff, because their friends and stuff like that come over. They probably won't have that issue. Now, down the road, they sell the house, they might have a newborn, they can readdress it then. But that's something that I look at there. And then also I start looking at, if they are real big entertainers and they're gonna have friends and family over a lot, then I wanna build this space that is all inclusive for what they're doing.
It's conducive to the gathering.
Yeah, I wanna make sure they've got, a place for patio furniture, they've got, a night lighting. If they're gonna be out after hours, then I wanna try to sell that low voltage lighting system with the uplighters, the path lights, all that stuff. If they're not real big into that, then I'm not going to try to upsell that portion. I'm going to try to sell them something that is more important to them and how they're going to use the space, so that they get the biggest bang for their buck. And I'm doing my job by designing something that is for them, not just this looks good on paper and would look good in your yard. It's what is important to you, and how can I make this the most that you can get.
I'm a huge homebody. Like, I love being at home. I love being around my family. That is where I like to be, and so that is where I like to invest, like my time. And so it's like the inside of our house is like this ever-evolving thing around the seasons and around the holidays. And Jackie's very good at decorating. And for people who host, like, I don't like to host. I don't like, just, you guys do your thing. I want to stay at home and leave me alone. But for people who do like to host, when you asked that question and he laid that out, and he was talking, I think his son was a teenager.
Yep.
And they were talking about how they're going to use it, and I saw, you're like, all right, so actually I think we should, and you laid out different plants, different trees, different bushes, and the guy was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And I was like, dude, you just gave him like a fingerprint. Like, they got to put their unique touch on it, because you understood how water is going to flow. You understood the proper way to lay things out, and also which plants are more, like I said, conducive to what it is they want.
Yep.
That this environment is going to create the conversations and keep people safe. We're in another family, another situation, newborn or no kids, that'd be a waste almost.
Yep.
Because it's not going to be used properly. And so I think for everybody listening, our top three things, we've got water, we've got your proper layout of your plants, as well as the proper design of your property. If you can get those three things right, you're going to have success. You're going to want to be outside. You're not going to be stressed out at home. And I think for all of us at home, that's where it's our safe space.
Yep.
That's our haven. That's where you should feel at your best. Not looking out your window stressed out, but looking out your window at the flower, like, yeah, you're doing dishes and that's not so great, but you got this beautiful flower, so it's not so bad.
Yep. And I think to recap, all of this, design for use, right plant, wrong place, and then water. Basically, you work that backwards. You're going to design for how you're going to use the property. And you're going to make sure you pick the right plants that go into that design. And then when it comes time to install, you have to make sure that you think about the water. And so therefore, it's when you put the pool in, if you've got your patio level, then you want to make sure that when you put the pool height in, you let your builder know, hey, the pool height needs to be lower than this height, because I want to make sure all the water's pitched to these areas. Or if the pool height has to be here, then you make sure you get your channel drains in and you tie that into your gutter system and all that stuff, so that when it all comes down, all three of those things are put into motion at one time, so that you've hit all of that. You've designed it for the way you want to use it. You've planted the plants where they need to be for the size that they get, as well as how you're going to use the place. And then we're making sure that water is going where it's supposed to go, so that you're not creating water issues that are going to ultimately haunt you down the road. So it's important to do all that all at the beginning stages and have it all mapped out.
And make sure you follow those 3 steps and you're not going to have any issues. If you do, you need consultation, reach out to us. We're happy, more than happy, to answer those questions. It's what we do. It's why I made this podcast. So avoid those 3 things: water, plants, design.